You are earning more than you were 5 years ago, and somehow you feel poorer. Your rent is higher. Your groceries are higher. Your car insurance is higher. And yet every news channel is telling you the economy has never been stronger. So who is lying? The data? Or your bank account? Neither, actually. And that is the most unsettling part of this story. Because what is happening to you right now has a name. Economists call it the K-shaped economy. And once you understand it, you will never look at economic news the same way again. More importantly, you will understand why working harder is not solving the problem, and why that is not your fault. This is not a political video. There is no left or right here. This is a math video, and the math explains everything you have been feeling. Let us start with what a K-shaped economy actually means. Imagine two people, same country, same year, same news headlines. Person A owns a house, has a retirement account, maybe some stocks. Person B rents, lives paycheck to paycheck. No stocks, no retirement fund. Between 2020 and 2025, something happened to both of them. Person A's house went up 40% in value. Their retirement account grew 60%. They did not do anything. Their assets just grew while they slept. Person B's salary grew 12% over the same period. But their rent grew 32%. Their groceries grew 24%. Person B worked harder, got promoted, got raises, and fell further behind. This is not a story about laziness. This is a story about what kind of assets you hold. The K in K-shaped means this. When an economic shock hits, two things happen at once. Asset prices go up because governments inject money into the financial system. And the cost of living goes up because that same money flows into prices. If you own assets, you win on both sides. Your assets grew and your costs grew, but less than your assets. If you only have a salary, you lose on both sides. Your income barely grew and your costs grew more. This happened in 2008. It happened in 2020. And it is happening right now. Each cycle, the gap between asset holders and non-asset holders widens a little more. And here is the number that explains everything. In Q3 2025, the top 1% of Americans owned 31.7% of all wealth. That is the highest share since the Federal Reserve started collecting this data in 1989. The bottom 50% of Americans collectively own 2.5%. 1% of the country owns more than the bottom 50% combined. This is not a political opinion. This is Federal Reserve data. And it gets worse when you understand what happened to asset prices specifically. Between 2020 and 2025, U.S. home values grew by an average of 47%. The S&P 500 grew 85% over the same period. If you own these assets, you experienced an extraordinary transfer of wealth toward you. If you did not own these assets, you experienced the inflation side only. And here is why this matters psychologically, not just financially. Because the brain does not measure wealth in absolute terms. It measures it relative to others. And when the people around you are getting richer faster than you, your brain registers this as loss. Even if you are earning more than ever. Even if, in absolute terms, you are doing fine. You feel poorer. And that feeling is not irrational. It is the predictable response of a brain that evolved in a social species. This feeling has a name in psychology, and understanding it changes everything. In 1978, psychologist Robert Merton wrote about something he called relative deprivation. The idea is simple. We do not judge our financial situation against an absolute standard. We judge it against the people around us, our neighbors, our colleagues, our social media feed. When those comparisons shift upward, we feel poorer, even if our absolute situation improved. And in a K-shaped economy, the reference group shifts upward constantly. This is not envy. Research shows it is a deeply wired survival mechanism. In our evolutionary history, falling behind your social group meant danger. The brain fires the same stress response to relative financial decline as to physical threat. This is why you cannot simply decide to stop feeling poor when you see your colleagues buying houses. Your brain will not let you. It is watching the relative gap, not the absolute number. And in 2025, the relative gap in the United States is larger than at any point since the Great Depression. The World Inequality Report 2026 called it persistent at very extreme levels. And here is the economic mechanism that most people do not understand. Asset prices compound. Salary income does not. If you own a house worth $300,000 that grows 10%, you gained $30,000 without working. The median American salary is around $56,000. That person worked all year for $56,000. The homeowner made $30,000 while sleeping. The worker made $56,000 while working 40-hour weeks. And the homeowner also has the salary. They just have an extra engine of income that the renter does not. This is not a flaw in the system. This is by design. Assets are supposed to compound. The problem is not that assets compound. The problem is that fewer people own them. In 1989, the bottom 50% of Americans owned 4% of all wealth. In 2025, they own 2.5%. It has not grown. It has shrunk. While the total amount of wealth in America has grown enormously, more wealth for everyone. But concentrated ownership means less of it reaches most people. And this compression happens through a mechanism most people have never heard of. When governments inject money into economies, it enters through financial markets first. By the time it reaches wages and salaries, asset prices have already moved. Asset holders capture the first wave. Everyone else gets the inflation. Understanding this mechanism is not about anger. It is about clarity. Because once you understand it, you can act on it. But before we get to that, I want to pause here for a second. If this is making something click for you right now, that feeling when a confusing thing suddenly makes sense, that is what this channel exists for. Subscribe to Wealth Autopsy if you haven't yet. Every week, we take something you have been feeling but couldn't name, and we give it a name. Now back to the part that actually changes things for you. The K-shaped economy is not going away. This is a structural feature, not a temporary problem. Every modern economy that uses central banking produces some version of this pattern. Because the mechanism, money entering through financial markets first, is how modern monetary policy works. This is not going to be reformed out of existence by an election. It is deeper than that. So the question is not how to change the system. That is a longer conversation. The question is what to do given that this is the system you are operating in. And the answer is both simpler and harder than most people want to hear. The only way to participate in the upward arm of the K is to own assets. Not necessarily stocks, not necessarily a house, but something that compounds independently of your labor. And here is the part that is genuinely hard about this advice. The people who most need to get onto the asset side are the people with the least margin to do so. If your costs are consuming your income, there is nothing left to invest. And this is the trap inside the trap. The K-shape makes it harder to get onto the K-shape. Costs rising fast eat into the margin needed to build assets, which keeps you on the bottom arm, which means costs keep rising relative to your wealth. Mullah Nathan would recognize this immediately. It is the bandwidth tax applied to wealth building. When you are fully consumed by immediate financial pressure, the long-term decisions get tunneled out. So what does someone with a tight margin actually do? The answer is not inspiring, but it is honest. The single most impactful thing most people can do is reduce their consumption exposure. Not because frugality is a virtue, but because margin is the only way onto the asset side. Even a small asset position changes your relationship to the K-shape. Because assets compound on themselves, even small ones. The point is not to get rich quick. The point is to stop being entirely on the bottom arm. But there is a psychological obstacle to this that almost nobody talks about. Relative deprivation makes it very hard to delay consumption. When you feel poorer than those around you, the brain craves immediate status signals. A new phone, nicer clothes, dining out. These are not frivolous choices. They are social pain relief. The brain under relative deprivation buys status signals to reduce the pain of feeling behind, which is exactly the opposite of what would move them onto the asset side. So the K-shape creates a psychological condition that makes it harder to escape the K-shape. Feeling poor makes you spend on status. Status spending keeps you poor. Mullah Nathan called this tunneling. When you are in scarcity, you tunnel on the immediate. And the immediate, the status purchase, the pain relief, always wins over the abstract future. This is not a character flaw. It is the predictable output of a stressed brain in a comparative environment. The system produces the stress. The stress produces the spending. The spending maintains the system. So what actually breaks the loop? Not willpower. Willpower fails in a state of relative deprivation. Not more income alone. More income without changing the relationship to consumption just means more expensive status signals. What works is changing the comparison group. If your reference group is people who are ahead of you on the K-shape, you will always feel behind. If your reference group is people on a similar trajectory who are intentionally building, that changes the feeling. This is why financial communities often outperform individual discipline. Not because of shared knowledge, because they change who you compare yourself to. And that shifts what feels like a status signal. Saving becomes visible. Building becomes social. The second thing that works is making the K-shape visible. What you are feeling is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that the system is working as designed. For most people, that reframe alone reduces the shame that drives the compensatory spending. Less shame means less pain relief spending. Less spending means more margin. More margin means the possibility of assets. Let me be clear about what this video is and is not saying. It is not saying the system is evil or that rich people are villains. Most wealthy people did not design the K-shape. They just benefited from understanding it earlier. And most people who feel poor in this economy are not making bad decisions. They are making decisions without information, without knowing what game is actually being played. You now know the rules. The K-shape is real. The relative deprivation is real. The compounding trap is real. But so is the possibility of getting onto the upward arm, even from a tight position. It requires margin, which requires consumption reduction, which requires understanding the comparison trap. And it requires a different relationship with what financial progress looks like. Because in a K-shaped economy, the visible signals of wealth and the actual mechanics of wealth diverge. The person driving the expensive car is often less financially ahead than the person driving the 10-year-old car with a full index fund. In a K-shaped world, the signal and the substance have separated. Most people are chasing the signal. The people moving up the K are building the substance. One more thing before we close. The feeling that you are falling behind, even when you work hard, is not a personal failure. It is the correct perception of a structural reality that most people have never had explained to them. The economy is working, just not for everyone equally. And the first step to changing your position in it is understanding what the position actually is. Not what you hoped it was, what it actually is. Because you cannot navigate without a map. And now you have one. The K-shape is the map. And knowing where you are is always the first step to getting somewhere different. The question is what you do with this map now. 3 things to take from this video. First, the economy growing and you feeling poorer are not contradictions. They are 2 arms of the same K. Second, the feeling of relative deprivation is real, measurable, and produced by the system, not your mindset. Third, the exit from the bottom arm requires getting onto the asset side. Even a small position changes the dynamic. You are not crazy for feeling this way. You are not failing. You are accurately perceiving a structural reality. That structural reality has a name now, and named things are navigable. If this gave you a framework for something you have been feeling for years, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe to Wealth Autopsy. This is what we do here every week. We name the things you have been feeling. We find the mechanism behind what seems unfair. And we tell you what the data actually says, not what someone with an agenda wants you to hear. Comment below. Do you own assets right now? House, stocks, anything that compounds? I want to understand where most of our audience actually is on the K-shape. Next week, the company that sells you a feeling of abundance while quietly making you poorer. See you then. Understanding this is not the end of the work. It is the beginning. The K-shape rewards those who act on it. Clarity is only useful if followed by action. Even one decision made with this map is worth more than 100 decisions made without it. You have the map now. What happens next is up to you. The single best financial decision you can make today is to reduce one unnecessary cost and redirect it. Not because the amount is significant, because the behavior is. Every large asset portfolio started as a small behavioral shift. And that shift starts the moment you stop spending to signal status and start building to generate income. The economy has never been more complex. Understanding it has never been more important. Wealth Autopsy. Every week, we cut to the truth. Until next time, keep asking why. This was Wealth Autopsy. We will see you next week.